So, moving on to the most recent episode of The Acolyte, of course, as we've been talking about these last few weeks, we now have episode 6 that aired this past, what was it, Tuesday.
Hmm.
And, hey, again, we're going to talk about spoilers, as we said at the top of the episode. So, if you have not seen The Acolyte, if you haven't seen episode 6 of The Acolyte, you might want to stop and come back after you have, unless you don't care about spoilers. But anyway, you have been warned. Um, we've talked a lot about what we think about this episode, or this show in general. And I think it's safe to say we're both kind of mixed to enjoying it.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah,
if I
that's
could
true.
speak for you,
Yeah.
what did you think about the most recent one?
Um, Not much, honestly. It was frustrating watch, to be perfectly blunt about it.
Really?
It was just kind of like there's elements within it that I feel like are informative and good, but then overall it feels like you're spinning wheels, and it just felt like there was a lot of at this point Soul getting ready to talk to quote unquote OSHA, who's actually May, in terms of saying what happened, but it's like Charlie Brown with the football. It gets pulled away every time it's going to be talked about. But and that'd be okay if this was the first time it's happened, but it's been happening almost since the two of them have seen each other again. And so it's just like, man, okay, like we're at episode 6 and there's only 2 left. So is that the mechanism of the story you're telling, that the pacing has to be drawn out in such a way that he won't actually tell her until next week's episode, and then you'll get some big final battle thing on episode 8? And if so, it's like, well, you could have done with less teasing of him about to tell her in that way. It could have been like maybe one other time that he was going to tell her and it got interrupted. But it seems like it's happened at least half a dozen times in this series so far, that he's about to tell her what happened. Oh, I'll tell you when we get back to the ship. Oh, I'll tell you when we... It's like, okay, well, just say it, at this point. So it's frustrating from that perspective. But the stuff with Chimera or the Stranger, it's interesting stuff there that I feel like, okay, we're getting a little bit more, at least in regard to this character, and seeing a little bit more and opening up the layers there. But it's just, again, the overall idea from this episode I got was just frustrating, because with this half an hour thing, and we talk about it every week, but it bears mentioning again, is just that with an hour, I feel like, okay, there's plenty of time to stretch things and let things kind of develop and go in a way that feels like you're filling in information and still having a forward momentum with the story. But it's not like that, because you only have a half an hour. And I remember as I started the episode and OSHA wakes up on that island, and she's kind of like looking around for where she's at, getting her bearings, and comes across the Chimera in the thing. It was like I remember looking. It was 3 minutes into the episode, and I was like, "It's 3 minutes in, and this is no one said a word. Nothing's happened yet, and there's only going to be like 24 more minutes in this show." So it's like
We
this
don't
is
have
all
time
well
for
and
no
good.
dialogue.
Yeah, we don't have time for this. Like the pacing was this way, and it was an hour episode, all fine and dandy. But no,
Right.
it's like we don't have much time, because I remember I paused it at that point just to see like what the runtime was. I was like, oh no, this is a short episode again. So we don't have time for this. So it's I guess it was just frustrating from that point of view of just not being able to fully feel like you're getting enough momentum moving forward, and when it does, that's when the episode ends. So I feel like in 6 episodes, the story we've gotten so far could have been told in 3 episodes, probably 3 hour long episodes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, and I think, yeah, that's
Definitely.
kind of like the frustrating part of it, is that you can feel that as you're watching it. Whereas, and I don't always want to keep comparing, but when I watch an episode of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, and it's a full long hour episode, or even a show like The Boys, which was an hour or some more, you feel like you had a full meal. You feel enriched by the end of that episode, where you're like, okay, I I'm glad it ended because I needed to take a break after that. After all I watched, whereas
Right.
like after episode of the Acolyte, you're like, I'm still hungry. That did nothing for me. That was like a morsel. Like I need more, and so I think that's the part of it that's a bit frustrating, in that I like what is happening most of the time within the show, but it's just the pacing and the way it's cut is so frustrating to experience, that I almost wish that they could have just dropped it all at once and I could have just binged it, because then I think I probably would have had a more full experience with it. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not a terrible episode. It's just that it felt like there's not a lot of momentum that happened in it.
Yeah, it's the whole show is tough because and unfortunately, Michelle's not on the episode this week, but because she and I have talked about the Acolyte a few times throughout the week since episode 5, and she is no doubt enjoying the show way less than me, and is in fact now tapped out. She's not watching it anymore. And but the thing is like when we've talked about it, I don't disagree with really anything she says, and
Mm-hmm.
completely agree. I think it's just a matter of maybe coming at my enjoyment of the show from a different place, either as a Star Wars fan or I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that I know she's a Star Wars fan as well, but then I find myself doing the same thing as I watch each episode. Like this episode, in some ways, I loved this episode. Like just as a fan, I was fascinated by some of the conversation happening. But then, yeah, from another perspective, I'm like, the whole thing has not been very good television. It's not very good storytelling. It's not very good writing. And, you know, I hate to sound like a broken record, but yeah, like the short episodes just don't work for me, and it's really unfortunate. I mean, what have we heard the budget for the show was? Like
170,
100.
I think.
Okay. Because yeah, like just now I looked up. I was trying to figure out like what was the budget for like House of the Dragon, and the only thing I could
Mm,
find is like 20 million per episode, which I mean that sounds pretty comparable, right?
yeah,
Like
especially this season with only
yeah,
eight episodes.
and it's funny. You and I were talking off air about the documentary series they do on HBO, House
Oh,
the Dragon built, I think it's called.
yeah.
And I watched an episode of that today for the first time. I didn't even know that show existed.
Mm,
And not going off on a whole House of the Dragon side conversation, but my point being, like, I watched an episode of that, and I'm watching the production of that show from a behind the scenes perspective. And obviously, I'm sure there was a lot that went into the production of this show as well, but still, I don't know. I'm like, you're able to do all this
mm.
and these meaty hour long episodes, like what, from what appears to be the same kind of budget. I don't understand what we're doing here. Like, it is frustrating. When it comes to specifically to this episode, yeah, like it's frustrating still because there's a lot of the stuff like you mentioned, especially on the kind of the soul slash I guess slash May portion of this story that was kind of frustrating to watch. Like you
Mm.
said, he keeps throughout a couple episodes or more now saying, I have a lot to tell you. I'm going to tell you everything. And it just keeps not happening. And then I don't know all the bits with what's the character's name, the one the little creature.
Oh,
Um, and anyway, it's on the ship with them, and
yeah.
it's obviously suspicious that this is not actually OSHA, and tries to like stop her at one point. I don't know, that whole bit was
Basil,
just
Basil,
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 or yeah, I think it is
Basil.
Basil, or maybe it's Basil. I don't know. That whole kind of side little storyline going on was just like it was especially silly because it wasn't even like it's Basil that really tips Soul off, I don't think, to what's going on, you know?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it would be one thing if we can see, oh look, you can tell Basil's suspicious, so then he's gonna
Mm-hmm.
like call her out. But it doesn't even come to that. Soul just
It
figures it
doesn't
out
even
on
come
his
there.
own, and even
Yeah.
that, the whole Soul like taking so long apparently to figure it out is like. I get that he's been through a traumatic experience, like as a Jedi. All these Jedi he
Mm.
was with were killed. That I get that, but still, like the level of Jedi we've been kind of shown that he is in this show, it didn't make much sense to me that he didn't almost immediately suspect that, hey, this
Mm-hmm.
is not Osha. And that was something Michelle and I talked about off air after episode 5, and she really bumped on. And at the time, I was like, well, maybe he actually does know, but he's just not really like revealing it to her yet. But nope, at the beginning of this episode, it still seems pretty apparent that he doesn't really know.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of frustrating. On the flip side, everything we saw between the stranger or Chimere
Mm-hmm.
and actual Osha was, I found, fascinating, even though there could be even more there. But like this was the
Mm-hmm.
kind of part of the show that before ever going into the Acolyte, I think I was kind of looking forward to, like seeing
Yeah.
things from
For sure.
a dark side slash Sith perspective, right? And I felt
Mm-hmm.
like that was what the Acolyte kind of always promised to be, and it's not really till episode 6 that we're kind of getting some of
Right.
that. you know
Yeah.
and this was the part of the show that I was like, I wanted to just keep going back to them, and
Mm-hmm.
like this, like there's no doubt that, and forgive me, I don't know the actor's name that's playing Chimera slash the stranger.
Manny Jacinto.
Yeah, no, he and that character I find fascinating, and every time he's on screen now, I'm like completely tuned in. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready, and I'm really enjoying what's going on there. Though at the same time, I wish there was a little more character work there, especially on the OSHA side.
Sure.
Like, he's obviously working to convince her and corrupt her, and it would already appear that she's more open to it than I think I would have suspected given what we've been given. I wish there
Right.
had been more development there to get her there.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's like it doesn't earn it, her deciding to, oh, okay, I'm going to end the episode. I'll actually try to put this helmet on. Like I don't feel like the character got there yet, but okay.
Yeah.
So it's like that's the part of the episode I'm enjoying and I'm fascinated by, but there's still, it needs, excuse me, it still needs work.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because there's so much potential here. Like like this, I think overall is the shell of a
Yeah.
really
I agree.
fascinating good story, and this could be so much better than it
Mm-hmm.
is. And there is the Star Wars fan in me that is still enjoying watching these episodes and is still enjoying, like, kind of wondering, hey, is he, actually still like a Sith apprentice or a Sith, or is he like a Sith that's been like shunned by his master and now he'll be at the beginning of the Knights of Ren, or what is going on here? I don't know. And that stuff is still interesting to me, but it's being delivered in a package that's pretty subpar.
Agreed. I can't dispute anything you just said because I agree with everything you just said. So uh, it's just
Okay.
it makes it a frustrating watch for all those reasons. Where it's like there's I heard someone put it in a very good way on one of a podcast I was listening to, and said that sometimes some of these Star Wars shows or Disney Plus shows in general are good shows with bad moments, and some of them are bad shows with good moments. And it's like, for him, that's what the Acolyte is. It's a bad show with good moments.
Right.
And I would say, like, that's how I probably felt about Boba Fett, the Book of Boba Fett. It was a bad show with a few good moments to it. And outside of that, it was just like, just very poorly conceived, especially for that character, just from where he was and how he becomes in that series. So it's kind of like, I think it has more of a clean slate in a sense that it doesn't have a certain level of expectation going into it because it's not a known entity like a Boba Fett or like a Obi-Wan or something of that nature, or an Ahsoka. So I guess I granted a little bit more rope in leeway in being able to have some faltering aspects to it. But at the same time, and I guess that's why it's more mixed to me because I know I am enjoying some elements of it, but without the level of expectations, high level of expectations going into it. But overall, it's just that if this show maybe had been released later, no, I'd say earlier this year, I probably would be ever so slightly more favorable towards it. But then what makes it hard to be give it any kind of advantage or leeway in that direction is having shows simultaneously on air to compare it to, like a House of the Dragon or The Boys, or even a couple months earlier, if anyone watched the series on Amazon Prime, Fallout. That is another show that did really well with its premise and having something there. And more and more, I still keep thinking about the idea that they need to have at Lucasfilm a real good session planned to where they just kind of brainstorm it and really write this stuff out well and throw darts at it, see where you can poke holes at it, and see where things need to be tightened up. And are we doing right by the show by confining it to 30 minutes? Is there more that can be fleshed out there and told in a better way? And maybe instead of 8 episodes, it's 6 episodes, but it's an hour for each episode or something. I don't know, but
Right.
it would serve it better in that way. And I think that for me, the more I think about it, I feel like that must be a Disney Plus mandate more so than a Lucasfilm mandate, because you still have Marvel shows that are that same 30-minute length too, that you would feel like, well, shouldn't some of these be an hour as well? But they all seem to fall into that 30-minute range as well. So it feels like it's a Disney Plus mandate more so than individual studio mandate, like, oh, Marvel says we're just going to do these 30-minute episodes, or Lucasfilm says we're going to do these 30-minute episodes. So something there has to change as well, just because if you're tying their hands in that way, it's unfair to try and create a story that is really well told in such a short amount of time when it's these types of series. I just don't think that that's enough time to really give you a full level of a story within a context of such a short time frame. Not these types of shows. I don't think it works well for them.
Yeah, it is weird how, like you said, it's apparent that this isn't just a Lucasfilm thing. That anything we've had really on Disney Plus, at least in regards to Marvel and Star Wars, have had this
Mm.
similar feel to these kind of short episodes. Like as I watch episodes of The Acolyte, every time the way they end on these kind of cliffhangers and such, it just reminds me of reading like a comic book
Mm-hmm.
where if you read issue to issue of any comic book, usually like comic books are relatively short, and they always kind of end on some type of big cliffhanger.
Right.
And I'm saying all this, I love comic books, and that's great for comic books, but it just doesn't work for this. But that's how it feels every time one of these episodes of The Acolyte like ends, and it's only been
Mm-hmm.
like 28 minutes, and it ends on some big cliffhanger where I go, well, I got another week to wait.
Right.
And I mean, I can hear the response of like, well, every show is like that. You wait another week, but it's just a big difference when you don't have much to watch, and then you're like left hanging for a week versus like, and again, we keep comparing to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, but like I watch an episode of House of the Dragon, I'm good to go. Like, don't get me
Mm-hmm.
wrong, I'm excited for the next episode a week later, but I am not like, oh man, I need it right now. Like, I'm good thinking about that episode for a week and enjoying like listening to podcasts about it and everything and talking to people about it for a week because there was a lot there. There's just not enough here. And I hope
Yeah,
like you're saying, I hope those conversations are happening. It's also frustrating when, you know, there's so much discourse about this show and a lot of it is for the wrong reasons.
right.
And then you're left wondering, well, like how much you'd like to think that like Lucasfilm and Disney is aware of all of it, of all, you know, not just the terrible discourse, but also the I feel like the creative, you know, constructive criticism is what I meant to say.
Hmm.
Yeah, we all just we want good Star Wars, and I mean Andor is a
Yeah,
perfect example of it. And I'm saying that I don't need everything to be like Andor. Like Andor is great, but if everything were like Andor, I don't think that's a good idea either. Because there's lots of
no.
people who are big Star Wars fans that didn't really like Andor because that's not the kind of Star Wars they want, and I get that. That's fine.
Hmm.
I thought it was fantastic, but you know, if you made everything like
Yeah,
that, then you'd turn a lot of people off. So we can get a variety, but still
100%. Yeah.
the quality level could be similar, is what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing wrong with trying to shoot for that level of quality each time you go out the gate for a show at this point. And I don't know if it's, to me, I almost feel like it's, I hate to go back to this because it's always a thing, but I think it goes to leadership in these different companies, these different studios. Where on one hand, with Marvel, you have Kevin Feige, and then with Lucasfilm, you have Kathleen Kennedy. And I feel like with Kathleen Kennedy's approach, she looks at numbers. She sees that the shows are doing well. She sees that the movies are doing well, making billions of dollars whenever they release, and the ends justifies the means. And so for her, it's probably like, well, if people didn't like it, then they wouldn't go see it. And she could easily have a case in point by just saying, look at Solo. It didn't perform like any other Star Wars movie has. And so you could make the argument to say that, well, if they don't like it, they won't show up for it. They won't watch it. And so if you don't watch it, then that means you're speaking, quote unquote, with your dollars. And
Right.
so all she's seeing is the numbers and saying the last, the last, wait, what is it? Not last Skywalker, but
Oh, Rise of
uh,
Skywalker.
Rise of Skywalker did well. So she's like, I guess people like it still. So we'll make a Ray movie and it'll take place 15 years after that. So that's the way I think she sees things. Whereas I feel like Kevin Feige has seen things, and while the movies are still making money and the shows are still getting good viewership, he hears the criticism and hears that people, while they're still tuning in and still thinking of these things, they feel that there's been a leveling off of quality and the enjoyment isn't quite there as much. And he's even said in interviews, you know, oh, well, we acknowledge that we're on our heels right now, but we like a challenge and that kind of thing. And so there's an acknowledgement there of that they're not where they were, and they want to get back to that, which is why they did announce that there would be only what five projects a year,
Yeah.
a mix of like two movies and three shows or something, maybe around something like that, and that's at max. So it could be less than that. So I think that there's that acknowledgement on that side that while they still see that the money is coming in, and even when they have a miss like the Marvels, they still are willing to be able to say, well, obviously we need to maneuver and make something that is giving people the feelings and the enjoyment that they had when we were first having our first like 20 movies or whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's that mindset and you can kind of sense that. And so there's that anticipation and that hope that they can do it. And because I think they've had less outright misses compared to Lucasfilm. that people are more hopeful and willing to give MCU a chance to rise again. Whereas with Lucasfilm, it feels like for most people, if you were to ask them, it's been huge levels of drops each time something comes out. And so that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been multiple things that have come out to make people feel that way, to where they just feel very hopeless about the idea of anything else that's going to be exciting in Star Wars. And even if something was announced, will it actually make it, because of so many things that get canceled or just, go away without ever actually coming to fruition. So it's harder on the Star Wars front right now, I think, than it ever has been. And it's just something that I think that they need to actually take a real hard look at and say that we need to map these things out a little bit better than we have been. Bring in showrunners and people that are more akin to doing these types of big budgeted things and can really bring out the best things within our product. Because at this point, it's your only thing, the only thing bringing in any revenue and income for your studio is Star Wars. So you
Right.
got to make it the best thing that it can be at this point.
Yeah. Agreed with everything you have to say. Well, we have 2 episodes left. We
Hmm.
are hoping for the best. um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe after episode 8, we will both be like, "Wow!" Like it all wrapped up in some perfect way, and or
Hmm.
maybe by then it'll feel like the kind of show. Okay, if I watch the whole thing, it actually works as an entire like. What would that be? Basically a 4-hour episode
Hmm.
or movie. I don't know. I don't think that'll be the case, but we'll see.
Yeah. And word on the street is like next week's episode is a flashback episode.
Right.
So hopefully it's telling everything, and it lays it all out on the table so that there's no remaining questions going into that final episode, which could be more rewarding and putting a bow on it and seeing where it goes from there, if it wraps up completely or if they try to leave it open for a potential second season.
Right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap things up. As always, we would love to hear back from all of you listening and watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please leave any questions or comments down below. And you can also reach out to us on Instagram and on Twitter or X at Flickr_effect. We would love to hear from you. With that, I'm Dave Lott.
I'm Bobby Jackson.
Thanks for listening and watching, everybody. Have a good night.